Several notable players have already entered the transfer portal. Thornton, Justin Flowe. Could Kris Hutson be the next one? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show. Thank you to everybody out there who has done so already. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Pack show here on a Friday. And by the way, next week we'll start out normal, but then the podcast schedule will shuffle around a little bit. We'll get to that at a later point in time, but I'll be on a Christmas vacation like many of you. But don't worry, you will still get the standard number of episodes here on Locked On Ducks. We start today with a mailbag question, and if you ever want to get in the mailbag, you can. It's really easy. You go to the YouTube comments, or you tweet the hashtag AskLODPod, or just DM me at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. My guy Little Ray, with a bunch of Y's that he put in until they let him have that name, asks, do you think Kris Hutson might transfer now that we see Holden coming in and possibly Bernard from Michigan State and possibly other transfers, and then you have Franklin and Dickey? Maybe Hutson is an unexpected transfer. I think this is a very legitimate thought because when you have all this roster reshuffling, it's really logical to ask, well, is that guy going to be able to play? Is that guy going to see the field? Is this guy going to be able to replicate the number of snaps or increase the number of snaps he had this year? That would lead him to think, yeah, no, staying here at Oregon is still my best option. I don't think Kris Hutson falls into that category. When you look at Kris Hutson compared to the other guys that are going to come in and compete for that receiver room, Kris Hutson already won a position battle this year, remember. And when you're talking about wide receivers, you really have three different receivers. You got an X, you got a Z, and then you have a slot guy. And Kris Hutson this year, and really in his whole career, has been most effective when he has been that slot guy. So when I look at the other receivers that Oregon is bringing in, whether it's Trayshawn Holden, Troy Franklin's already there, Jerion Dickey coming in, Ashton Cozart, you've got Kyler Casper waiting in the wings potentially. None of them project as the same style of player that Kris Hutson is, because Hutson has lined up outside before. He's hit some deep shots for sure, but for the most part, he's lining up inside the outermost receiver in a 3 or 4 or 5 wide receiver set. And that's a very different position to play, and you have to be a certain sort of player to do that. And one other thing that was noteworthy this year and was a big reason why Seven McGee transferred and went down to Jackson State is Kris Hutson became Oregon's gadget guy. And I think every offense needs a gadget guy. We've seen a lot of great ones come through the Ducks, right? DeAnthony, of course, the very best. We'll never have one as good as him, I don't think, because there are just not that many athletes like him. But Charles Nelson was very good. Jalen Redd was very good. I thought Seven McGee had the potential to be the next guy who does that. But Kris Hutson kind of snatched that role away from him. And I think that's why Seven's snap count deteriorated to the point where he ultimately decided to transfer away from the Ducks. So Hutson fills that role very well. And when I say gadget guy, I mean lining up in the slot and taking jet sweeps or pop passes, screen passes, quick hitters. That's the sort of player that Kris Hutson has become. I think he's evolved his game in that sense. He's a very well-rounded player. I don't mean to say that he's, exclusively a gadget guy on that front, but there are only certain players, and they typically have a smaller body type too, that can actually be jet sweep, quick hitter, that sort of gadget guy in the offense. And so I don't think there's anyone who can contend with him for that. Jerion Dickey is intriguing, but he is such a high caliber wide receiver. I don't think he's someone you can throw screen passes to a variety of receivers, right? Troy Franklin can do it. Thornton did it this year. Chase Cota did it pretty often. But a lot of them were thrown to Kris Hutson because you got to be able to get moving quickly. And guys who are bigger, that are long striders, I think typically don't fit that mold quite as well. And Hutson clearly established himself for that starting slot receiver role. And Jurion Dickey, when you watch this tape and just study his athletic profile, is a really good, really, really good yards after the catch guy. But that mostly comes down the field. And I'm not saying Jurion Dickey will never catch a screen pass in his career if he does stay committed to Oregon, which fingers crossed that that's the case. Indicators look good at this point in time. But I am saying that he is a bigger body type to where he doesn't need to be in the slot to be most effective. He can, do it all pretty much, but he's a guy who you're probably going to line up out wide most of the time. Maybe not all of the time, but most of the time. But you look at what Franklin and Trayshawn Holden, the guys that are actually on the roster right now, bring to the table. And I don't think they can do what Kris Hutson does. And conversely, I don't think Kris Hutson can do what those guys do. It's why I want to have all of them. But the question, which again, I think is a perfectly fair one to ask, of whether or not he's going to enter the transfer portal, my instinct would be no. Because I think his role has continued to increase this year. And typically players who transfer are seeing their roles, kind of stabilize or plateau or decline. And I think he's a guy who got more touches as last year went on, and he got more and more touches and was involved in more ways with those, quick screens and pop passes this year as this season went on. So I think his role is pretty solidified. I really like him too. I don't think that's a position where Oregon needs to upgrade whatsoever. Having depth at that position certainly doesn't hurt. But I think Kris Hutson is your pretty clear number 3 receiver, and I think you're doing pretty well if that's the case, which it is for the Ducks. Sometimes I come on here and report news stories and opine and commentate on them, and it's good news. And sometimes I come on here and it's not as good news. Sometimes no news could be good news. Sometimes. Brandon Dorlus and Noah Sewell have been guys who I have long said here on the show, and maybe by Monday it'll be different, are going to the NFL. But we are here, and it is December 15th as I record this. The deadline to declare is a month away, so still a lot of time. But we haven't heard anything from either of them. They're not out of eligibility. They are far from out of eligibility. Dorlus could come back for one more year. Sewell, I think, could have up to 2. There are not a lot of guys from the defense that I would look at and say after the season they had, boy, I really want to have that guy back. Like, there are just tough calls that you have to be able to make as fans, even if you like players and you think they're good kids, which, seems like just about everybody is. But you got to do what's in the best interest of the team here. But the Brandon Dorlus Noah Sewell thing could be very interesting because the fact that we haven't heard could be good news. I will speculate on that as you speculate where you place your next bet with BetOnline. Your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup, we've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. I would be surprised if one or both of them came back, but they would be welcome additions. When I look at the defense this year, it might be easy from the outset to say, they were not good. I don't want anybody back. We got to just completely start over. For the most part, that's true. But there are 3 guys that I would take back and that were regular contributors and were key parts to the things that Oregon did do well defensively in spurts this year. Brandon Dorlus was our best defensive lineman. It was not particularly close. I mean, not even remotely close. DJ Johnson was second, but there was a step down there. because Dorlus did it against the run and the pass. And I think Johnson, had nice moments doing both, but I don't think he was quite as impactful as Dorlus on the whole. And I think the stats bear that out. When you look at quarterback pressures and stuff and, studying how they impacted run plays, but maybe didn't get credit for it. Anyway, Noah Sewell has been at the center of this defense for the last few years. I know that a lot of Duck fans are maybe underwhelmed by what he did this year. He's a second-team All Pac-12 performer, and that was a disappointment. That's the sort of guy that I would want to have back on the defense. I would take both of these back in a heartbeat. Oregon's defense would be better for it, and we will be worse off if they both leave, because you'd be losing talent and experience. But those two and Gonzo are the only three that I would say, if Oregon's defense lost this player, there'd be a notable void to fill. Gonzo is gone to the NFL, probably a first or early second round draft pick, and that's a notable loss. And if you lose Dorlus, that'd be a significant loss. But neither of these guys have announced yet. I don't have any insider information that they're staying. What I am observing is each day that passes makes me ask the question more and more. Are these guys as NFL ready as I think they are? Because I think we all agree that Noah Sewell is really good, really talented, or at least most of us agree. I guess not everybody and such. He is an NFL caliber player. Is he fully developed to where I feel like he's maximizing his draft potential and he's got to strike the iron while it's hot? No, not necessarily. I think he could improve if he came back with another year or for another year and got development under a coach like Dan Lanning. I think that could be good for him. I think Dorlus is more NFL ready. When you watch Brandon Dorlus, I do think he has, spurts of inactivity somewhat where you're like, where is he on the field exactly? Like Thibodeau was never like that, right? When Kayvon was on the field, we all knew it. Everybody knew it because he was making an impact. He stood out on the screen. His speed, his tenacity, ferociousness, everything just popped. So you always knew when he was there. Dorlus has that in moments, but is not quite at that level. So maybe these guys are going through their draft evaluations and Dorlus is saying, well, if you make more impact plays, if you're more consistent, if you do this, then you could be a higher round draft pick. I think that more applies to Sewell because one thing that Jeff Schwartz pointed out, who's a great follow on Twitter for a number of reasons, by the way. He's got great information. He's also really funny and seems like a really good dude. If you're not following him, you definitely should be. But what he pointed out at one point this season that I completely agree with is that Brandon Dorlus uses his hands the way you see NFL players use their hands. And that's something that he has done to kind of set himself apart from other defensive linemen. His hand movement and ability to not allow an opposing offensive lineman to engage with him because he fights and slaps their hands away. It looks really high level and it looks like an NFL guy. And he does, he rarely gets moved a lot. He can play inside and outside. He's got great technique. He had a lot of moments, more than any other, probably more than the rest of the defensive line combined, honestly, where he went swim move or quick hand move or spin or something right around the quarterback or right around the offensive lineman to put pressure on the quarterback. Like DJ Johnson's best move was a bull rush. And when he did that, he did it very well. But Dorlus has a greater array of pass rush moves that I think make him a more attractive talent to the NFL. And Noah Sewell, I still think does a lot of really good things. And he actually grades very well in pass coverage. I still think with his zone assignments, he can be a little bit more disciplined at times or glue onto guys a little bit better. But for the most part, he does it a lot better than you'd think. I'm not saying it's perfect, but he does it a lot better than you think. I would love to have just one of them back. I really, really would. I don't anticipate that. But again, with each passing day, I just question, maybe these guys are testing the waters and they're hearing, yeah, you're a 4th or 5th round pick right now, but if you were to improve this, next year you could be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Just a thought. It's just a thought. By Monday, this could all be moot. It is an ever-evolving world. But I thought we would have heard by now. We heard on Gonzo almost right away because he is a surefire thing to get drafted in the league. And I think questions are at least being asked either on Brandon and Noah's side or on the NFL side, that is leading us to have not heard at this point in time that they're going to the league. And I'd take either of them back. Under the radar hire. Nice word choice, Spencer. That was really good. Under the radar addition for the Ducks in 2023. Luke Dune, I think is how it's pronounced, Dunne. He's a punter. He's from Australia. He doesn't have stars. He doesn't have name brand recognition. He doesn't have anything like that. When you look at Oregon's special teams the last few years, they've been pretty bad. Camden Lewis has solidified the part of special teams that we all pay attention to, which is kicking field goals. Or I should say we all pay attention to the most. But, yeah, go look up some of Oregon's rankings this year in college football in the special teams department on things like kickoffs, kick returns, punting, punt returns. It was not bad. It was Oregon third down defense bad, okay? It's in that same vein. It was atrocious, essentially. And I do not think Joe Lorig, the special teams coach, is no good at his job because it wasn't good when he got here, and you can't change that sort of stuff in just 1 year. So Camden Lewis back for another year. That's great because, man, I feel so good about having him as our kicker. I really, really do. Never thought I'd say that after the way his career started, but good for him. Credit to him. He's fantastic. But that is the only element of Oregon special teams that is solidified right now. I mean, the only element. I'm pretty sure our long snapper just graduated too. He's been here for a few years, so we got to get a new one of those. And you never notice those guys or think about them until they come into play. Same sort of thing with punting. And think about this too in the context of how Oregon's defense played this year. Maybe even specifically in the Oregon State game. How many times did the special teams put them behind the 8 ball? I mean, yeah, they got to be better. They got to be able to hold Oregon State to a field goal on one of those short field drives the way they did in the Washington game. But why was it short field after short field there late in the fourth quarter or so? Or late in the third, early in the fourth, whatever you want to say, late in the game. Because the special teams just wasn't that good. Now, I think Andrew Boyle did a number of things well this year. Recovered an onside kick against UCLA, completely flipped the tone and tenor of that game. I mean, that was brilliantly executed. Tried it again against Washington. Yeah, I didn't hate it. Defense had no answer for Michael Penix and company. And there they actually held to a field goal, ironically. So I look at the addition of a punter, and it's not flashy. It's not a running back. It's not a receiver. He's not going to, score points or do anything like that. But find me the great defense that doesn't have at least good special teams. It doesn't really exist. Like, you can't have a great defense and atrocious special teams. Because if the punter can't flip the field, yes, I wish we could just bring back Jackson Rice and keep him forever. I understand. But we can't do that. So we have to move forward. If the punter can't flip the field, then the defense has to work with not very long fields. And offensively, right, we saw in that Oregon State game, Kris Hutson makes a mistake. I like Hutson as the return man, by the way. Going back to my earlier conversation, that's definitely a point that I forgot to put down in my notes and should have covered. He's a return guy as well, which again, further reason as to why Seven McGee left, because I thought, that would be a prime spot for him, and Kris Hutson was better. I thought he was unquestionably better on that front. Kris Hutson makes a mistake and puts the offense back inside the 5. Advantage defense, because the offense is playing defensively, which is not what you want to be doing. And Oregon's defense this year, I think a lot of times had to start in enemy territory, sure, which is where you'd hope they would be most of the time. But far too often, it was out by the 30 or 40 yard line. Like, how many times this year? Here's a thought that I want you to ponder that I will tell you about after I remind you that driving whilst not sober is just not okay. Let's say you're hanging out with some friends, putting back a few drinks, Few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride, but say, nah, live nearby. I can make it home okay. It's not a big deal. Well, it is. Even if you think, what are the odds I'll get pulled over? Even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, lose your license, lose your job, total your car, kill someone. This is all possible stuff. Happens every year, unfortunately. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. That doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. Why? Don't ask me. But don't be the person that does. Police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. If you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, just think again. Play it safe. Plan ahead. Get a ride. Only takes one mistake to change your life forever or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. This message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Here's a thought for Oregon. And the special teams thing that I think did go well this year was Boyle handling kickoffs, though a few too many went out of bounds at the end of the year, which again, not helping your defense very much. He did a really nice job of just generating touchbacks, which is good. I thought he did that at a high clip. Can always be better, of course. You shouldn't have more than like one kick out of bounds or maybe two all season long. You just should not happen because you can tee it up anywhere you want, wherever you tend to shouldn't happen. Okay. Think back on this season and try and picture for me a moment where Boyle kicked it off, their return guy caught it, attempted a return, and they were pinned back inside the 20. There might have been one, but I can't really think of it. Certainly not in a game where it really counted. The best option on special teams needs to be something other than a touchback when you're talking about kickoffs. And it's the same thing with punting. The number of times this year where you go, that wasn't a great punt. How many times did we down a punt inside the 10-yard line or so? Think about this. Right, with regards to the punter we added, Luke Dune. Remember the Ohio State game? I think we all remember that one pretty vividly. You know who was an undersold MVP of that game? I want to say the punter was Ian Wheeler, but I remember he downed Ohio State back inside the 10 or the 5 on multiple occasions. And it was huge. It was huge. And Oregon's offense had to do 2 95-plus yard drives, which is not a repeatable formula, by the way. Not something you want to have. So the defense needs to make personnel and scheme adjustments. Totally agree. But the special teams also have got to be better than they were this year because you got to help out the defense a little bit. And I think not only were they not helping, I think they were hurting the defense by giving them shorter and shorter fields to defend than what they should. And that can often be the difference between a team picking up another first down and having it result in a touchdown or having to settle for 3 points and a field goal. So Luke Dune, punter from Australia, a lot of Aussie guys there have come over to the United States to be punters. A lot have done very well. I don't really care how it looks, whether you're doing running punts and doing it more on the ground or if you can boom it in the air like Jackson Rice used to. Don't care. Just be effective. And Oregon needs to make that adjustment. Not surprised to see that addition. So special teams will definitely be an area for growth for the Ducks going forward. Finally, my man Peyton asks a question not specifically related to Oregon football. Okay, maybe not at all. But I love fun questions. Keep the mailbag questions coming. At Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. Send me a DM or at me on Twitter. You can also hop in the YouTube comments. I monitor those every day. Make sure no one's getting mean or abusive in there, which I have not seen, have not had to block or remove too many people from the channel at this point in time. But if it gets to that point, then yeah, that'll happen. But it's a great way to ask me a question. So Peyton, right in the DMs at Locked On Ducks, said, here's a question. Who do you think is the most overrated Star Wars franchise character? That's a great question. Because my initial instinct here is Rey. But here's the thing. I don't think Rey is rated that highly amongst actual Star Wars fans. So if you're talking about people who are overrated, you have to go to someone who is thought of, at least in a pretty solid and respected light among Star Wars fans. And I don't think the answer there is Rey. I think there are a number of different ways you could go with this particular answer. And as you may know, I'm a huge, huge, huge Star Wars fan. It's not an easy thing. This is a difficult question. I thought long and hard about it. But I did come to a conclusion. And I think the answer is Anakin Skywalker, specifically in the prequel movies. Here's why. In the first one, he's great. Boy, Anakin, awesome, fantastic, really, really like him. But specifically the acting performance of Hayden Christensen in episodes 2 and 3, it has a nostalgic feel for me because I grew up with it and there are things about it that I like. But overall, one of the biggest drawbacks of the prequels are the acting performances of Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen. They are not at their best in those roles. They just aren't. The romantic chemistry is not very good. And I think it's more Hayden than Natalie, personally. So do I still like him? Yeah, of course. I'm not all anti-Anakin. However, here's why I specified it to the prequel movies. If you watch the Clone Wars, that Anakin Skywalker is amazing. Absolutely amazing. That's how we end the week. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.